want to share with you my future outlook for the Park City real estate market. And this is within the context of the coronavirus that's affecting all of our lives, both in Utah, in the United States, and around the globe. Do this by going back and looking at when it first started. It's our belief now, as we look back, that the Sundance Film Festival, end of January, beginning of February time period is when the virus first came here. And nobody knew it was the virus. In fact, the locals who became ill gave it the nickname Sundance Flu because it seemed to coincide with the Sundance Film Festival. It took a little bit of time for us to realize that was COVID-19, the coronavirus. The first community spread in Utah of the coronavirus began actually in Park City in a bar on Main Street. And from that point on, the Summit County Department of Health closed down a lot of businesses. The resorts, Park City Mountain Resort closed, Deer Valley closed, Woodward Resort closed, lots of places closed, restaurants closed, and for all intent and purposes, we were closed, we were out of business. Some people were just arrived for the ski vacation, and no sooner did they get here as they had to turn around and go home because the resorts were closed, accommodations were closed. It's a terrible situation. So we kind of muddled through things, and as it applies to real estate, it was difficult to tell people, it was difficult to know what was going to happen, then it was difficult to advise people accordingly as to what was going to happen in the realm of the real estate market. Well, we watched it for about 3 months, and eventually I got to a place that I created what I call my timeline, and it's a 12-month timeline, and the reason I chose 12-month is approximately at the beginning of the year is when the virus came in, eventually was discovered in March. And as the experts were stepping forward, Dr. Fauci and others, they were saying, you know, it's going to be a year to 18 months before we see a vaccine. And so, you know, I thought as I try to look at the market and try to assess it and present a forecast, if you will, for people, I needed to go out at least 24 months. So that's why the timeline began that way. I decided to, as I looked at what was happening and looked at what was likely to occur, I broke it into 7 phases, and this recording is actually an update in October. The first recording was in July, and we've seen some changes, so we're updating it, and we'll keep updating it as changes occur. But let's go through the phases. We start out with the discovery phase, and as I said, this is when different places around the world were experiencing it, and whether they had a label for it or not, or a transition label, the Sundance Flu, it eventually became known as the coronavirus, and it started becoming quite well known during the first 3 months of the year. Well, that resulted in a reaction, and I'll call the reaction the shutdown phase. This is where places all around the globe started to react to it. There was the discussion of social distancing, there was mask wearing or non-mask wearing. It's just a lot of things, but things were shutting down because we just didn't know what we had. And you recall the news broadcasts, and nobody knew. The experts didn't know. And so that basically is the 3 to 5 month period. About May, June-ish or so, we entered into the reopening phase. We started to get a sense of what was going on with the pandemic, and different people had their different theories, as you're well aware. But we saw things start to open in an effort to reopen the economy. The experts were asking a lot of questions at that time. Will there be a second wave? And of course, by then, people were pretty weary and wanting things to be back to the way they were. Certainly understandable. But there was the discussion about limiting social distancing and whether masks were important, and some people didn't want to wear masks. But these were the efforts that were discussed, and depending upon where you were in the country, or on the planet for that matter, people were responding differently to the reopening phase. And this was, of course, dictated by whether or not there'd be a second wave. People were concerned of being a second wave as we're opening up. We certainly don't want that to happen. So then we moved into the 4th phase, which I'll call the success or setback phase. This is where we were going to see whether the decisions we made, whether on a local level, state level, federal level, or global level, were going to work or not work. And different places saw success. We know in the United States it all began terribly in New York City. There was the epicenter, ground zero for all intents and purposes. And then it eventually spread, and then they got it under control, had successes, and now they're starting to have setbacks. And so we've seen that throughout the country, different successes, different setbacks. And as you can tell, this is months 7 through 12. We're in October. We're certainly still in this phase. But it, of course, led to lots of questions. Is there going to be a second shutdown? And we're starting to see that now being processed, and different places are changing their level of response to the pandemic and making decisions about shutdowns on a local level and possibly on a federal level, depending upon the results of the upcoming presidential election. Anyway, it's certainly during this phase that we're in right now that states wanted to get back to normal. There are a lot of political fighting between red states, blue states, depending upon how testing was being handled, and therefore tracing was being handled. And of course the vaccines, and we've had very positive news, although it's not certain news yet, about positive news of vaccines coming or treatments coming. But we have to also realize that whether in the United States or elsewhere in the country there's vaccines, it's one thing to have a vaccine, it's another to have a global vaccination effective so that it doesn't keep spreading. Of course, we have the Black Lives Matter protests that have been very important, very significant. Schools now have begun to open, some have closed. Some are part-time and some are partially online, some in person. We are again wading our way through that, and every region of the country is handling that according to how the outbreak is impacting them. And of course, we're deep into the presidential campaign. We're about 3 weeks out from the election. I'm recording this on October 17th. And depending upon what happens there will impact how we move forward from here. So these are the first 4 phases that I'm proposing that you consider: discovery phase, shutdown phase, reopen phase, and the success or setback phase. The next phase I see coming is the treatment and vaccine phase, and we're certainly seeing glimpses of this now with the testing. Some of the vaccines are in their 3rd stage testing, and then it needs to be brought out. And of course, there's people debating whether or not they're going to take the vaccination or not. So there's a series of other questions that surface here, and that's the worldwide attitudes of the treatments, the vaccines. Of course, we have questions about who the next president in office will be, and we know from whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, very, very different philosophies, very, very different outlooks and directions that they'll be giving the country. We're accepting the new normal, not because we like to, but because we have to. But it still is going through twists, and this is second half, or this phase, I should say, will be a lot of deciding how much we're going to accept this and embrace it or fight against the new normal. People are grappling with their confidence on traveling, but traveling is increasing. Will people fly or not? That still is being processed. Some airlines have blocked out the center seat, so they're creating the social distance on the flight. Others are now opening up the center seat for passengers as more are starting to fly. Will people go on vacations? People are definitely considering that, and many are only going to vacations within driving distance. Now this impacts Park City depending upon where you live if you're going to come here on vacation. So we have lots of questions during this phase, whether it's the U.S. questions or world economy questions, and of course the stock market and reversals, and on it goes. Then there is the 7th phase, which I'll call the new normal. So I believe we'll really start seeing the true new normal is as we have treatments and we have vaccines, and we feel like there's a way to get through this. And so there will, of course, be many, many more questions that will surface. But this is my outlook for the next 2 years, and we are, about into the second quarter of it, if you will, the success and setback phase. We've opened up a special page on our website, BuyParkCity.com, called COVID-19 Update, and you can go there at any time. The goal here, and this is an ever-changing site, is to provide information on schools, the resorts openings, sports activities, restaurants, you name it, just a place to go. So bookmark that. Be sure to go there as you need to get an update, whether you're local here in Park City or live elsewhere but thinking of coming to Park City. So with that in mind, let's look at the future outlook for Park City in a little more specific ways. And I want to begin by concentrating on 4 different areas of the market, starting with primary homes. What's happening with primary homes? Well, it's our strongest market because people still need homes. They need a place to live and a place to distance themselves or be safe. And Park City offers a healthy outdoor lifestyle, so we have a lot going for ourselves. And so the home market is now steady. And I say that within the context of when the outbreak first broke out, things were shutting down mid-March. We had a good 6 weeks of ghost town in Park City. The streets were bare. Main Street, you could walk up and down the center of the street. Nobody was there. But now it's a very busy, robust community, and the home market is selling very well. The next segment of the market was second homes, and we were wondering about that because those are people who often live elsewhere, come either exclusively during the ski season, sometimes for as little as 2 weeks during the year or the season, other times more. What's going to happen with that market? Initially it was slow but steady, and that's what we saw during the earlier times. We have since seen an interesting change because people who live around the country who are perhaps in more congested cities, and it's very difficult to social distance, and now people are working remotely and using the internet. Many of those property owners have actually moved into their second homes. Some of these folks would come up here 2 weeks a year to enjoy it during the winter. Now they spend the whole summer here. So they're occupying, which means they're not selling them, but because they can be primary residences, or some people are viewing this as the time to buy a second home and get out of where they live, at least during this time in the outbreak. It was slow at first, but it's pretty steady now. Then the rental market, and the rental market is really quite different because at first it was on a major pause. And what I mean by major pause is nobody wanted to buy anything when it came to a rental property because it was uncertain whether the ski resorts would open for the 2021 season. The restaurants, equally true. Would people be flying? Would they be going on vacations? And so who needs a rental property? And at first we were discussing this segment of the market when not much was happening and said, gee, when it starts happening, there will probably be investors who see the opportunity and can buy low with an aggressive offer because not much is happening. But we waited and waited, and that didn't happen. We were actually kind of surprised that didn't happen. The pause kept going longer, and then it catapulted beyond that and became an incredibly strong market and has been for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Again, I'm recording on October 17, 2020, but it suddenly became hot, and it became hot for a couple reasons. People who had come here to rent during the summer just to get out from wherever they were accustomed to being realized Park City was a great place to live. And if they wanted to keep renting as we moved into the ski season, they soon learned that the rental rates triple or quadruple, and because they were getting discount rates during the pandemic. And so that really wasn't an option. So some of them started thinking, maybe I should buy one of these. In the same fashion, there were people who owned those, just like second homes, who were starting to hang out in Park City, clean outdoor lifestyle. You can go on hikes, bike rides, you name it, and just weren't in the congested cities, and it was easier to social distance. So the market moved from having no interest, skip the bottom feeders will come in and try to buy them, to everybody wants them because maybe they want to relocate here. So it really became a seller's market even for the rental part of our marketplace. Then there's vacant land, and how is vacant land? Vacant land was limited because there isn't that much vacant land in Park City. You got to go into Snyderville Basin, and frankly, you have to go into some of the surrounding communities, Midway, Oakley, you name it. But it's getting more and more sparse, the available inventory. So people started doing that and buying property out there. My wife and I, we bought a big piece out there because it's very, very limited. And so if you have any interest in owning land, especially larger parcels, you want to hop all over that. So that's kind of my outlook for the Park City real estate market. And again, we updated this. We're updating in October because that rental section really changed. And we'll continue to update this. But we hope that this is helpful for you. If you have any questions, you can email me at ron@thewilsteinteam.com. If you'd like a call back, I'll leave your phone number and best time to call, and I'll give you a ring. There's my phone number, 435-487-0151. And hope this has been helpful. Give you food for thought, but definitely if you have any questions, give us a call. We're here for you.